Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Doc says it's impossible. Stranger saves man from living hell in time itself. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Anomaly. A rhythmic clatter of Sarah's heels echoed hollowly against the polished concrete floor of the Glenmont metro station. Every morning, the symphony of the morning commute played the same monotonous tune, the screech of brakes, the murmur of hurried conversations, the stale air thick with the scent of coffee and regret. Today, however, a discordant note pierced the familiar melody. As Sarah scrolled through the usual newsfeed on her phone, a headline jumped out, its garish red font a stark contrast to the dull grays and blues of her screen. Living nightmare at Glenmont. Man claims his mind is trapped in the future. She scoffed, her thumb hovering over the close button. Another clickbait article designed to provoke outrage. But something snagged at her, a morbid curiosity. With a sigh, she tapped on the link. The author's words were a desperate cry for help, a frantic description of a mind hurtling forward in time while the body remained anchored to the present. Each sentence dripped with a raw, primal terror that sent a cold shiver down Sarah's spine. The final line, though, was the one that left her frozen. If you're at Glenmont and have a gun, please end it for me. Her pulse quickened. A morbid prank? Surely. She forced herself to put the phone down, the disturbing narrative clinging to her like cobwebs. Glancing up, she joined the throng of commuters, their faces a blur of tired indifference. But something felt different. The normally smooth press of bodies against hers felt jerky, almost asynchronous. Was it her? Sleep deprivation messing with her head? Then she saw him. Huddled beneath a worn advertisement, a man looked more like debris than a human being. His clothes were disheveled, his hair matted, and his eyes bloodshot and vacant seemed to pierce through the crowd. Unlike the purposeful strides of the commuters, he remained unmoving, a statue amidst the hurried chaos. Drawn by a strange compulsion, Sarah veered off course, her steps slowing as she approached the solitary figure. As she drew closer, the man seemed to flinch, his head snapping up like a startled animal. Their eyes met. In that frozen moment, a flicker of recognition, a desperate plea, sparked in his glazed eyes. Then, his gaze darted away, falling on an invisible clock only he could see. A tremor racked his body, his face contorting in silent agony. The fluorescent lights above buzzed momentarily, the familiar hum flickering for a split second. When the light stabilized, Sarah felt a prickle crawl up her spine. The hurried movement of the crowd now seemed jerky, their voices a distorted cacophony. Her phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor with a jarring ring that seemed to snap her out of the trance. Panic surged through her. Was it just exhaustion? A migraine playing tricks on her mind? Blinking rapidly, she bent to pick up her phone. As her hand brushed against the screen, the headline on the news feed jumped out at her. Living nightmare at Glenmont. Man claims his mind is trapped in the future. But now, a new line had appeared below it. Glitch in time perception reported at Glenmont Station. Sarah's breath hitched. The glitch wasn't just with the lights. It was with time itself. And the man under the bench, he wasn't suffering from a delusion. He was living a waking nightmare, trapped in a personal hell where time had become his prison. Chapter 2. A plea through the distortion. The news feed confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The glitch wasn't in her head. It was real, and the man huddled under the bench was its living testament. His vacant stare seemed to bore into her, a silent plea for help, echoing through the distorted hum of the platform. Hesitantly, she inched closer, the rhythmic click of her heels a jarring counterpoint to the warped flow of time around them. The man flinched again as she neared, his body tensing like a cornered animal. "Why, you saw the post." His voice, raspy and disused, emerged from parched lips. Sarah swallowed, the dryness in her own throat mirroring his. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I read what you wrote." A flicker of something akin to hope flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by a look of harrowing despair. "It's true," he rasped, his words tumbling over each other in his desperate haste. "The trial, the drug, it went wrong. My mind centuries ahead, my body trapped." He gestured vaguely around him, the chaotic movement of the crowd a stark contrast to his own frozen state. "They move so slow," he whispered, his voice cracking. Everything distorted a blur. Sarah's skepticism, fueled by the absurdity of the situation, battled with a growing sense of empathy. This wasn't a prank. The raw desperation in his eyes was undeniable. "What about the doctors?" she asked tentatively. "Didn't they try to help you?" A hollow laugh escaped his lips, a chilling sound devoid of humor. "They think I'm crazy. Said it's just a side effect. We'll wear off." He glanced at his invisible clock, his face contorting in silent agony. "But how long? Minutes, for me, feel like lifetimes. This is hell." The desperation in his voice gnawed at Sarah. Here, amidst the banal routine of the daily commute, a man was trapped in a personal time warp, his mind a prisoner in a body frozen in place. She wasn't a doctor, not even close. But she couldn't just walk away. Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened her resolve. "I can't fix what happened," she admitted, her voice gaining strength. "But I can try to help you find someone who can." His eyes widened, a flicker of hope battling the despair etched into his features. You do that?" "There has to be a way," Sarah insisted, more to herself than to him. Pulling out her phone, she launched into a frantic search. Medical journals, research papers, anything that might offer a clue, a glimmer of hope. Time, for Sarah, was a tangible thing now. The agonizing seconds for the man stretched into an eternity for her. Every impatient sigh, every jostle in the distorted crowd amplified his silent scream. The platform, once a place of monotonous routine, now pulsed with a desperate urgency. Chapter 3, Racing Against the Distorted Clock. The fluorescent lights of Sarah's cramped apartment buzzed with an intensity she hadn't noticed before. Every tick of the clock on the wall seemed to echo the frantic beat of her heart. She hunched over her laptop, her eyes scanning medical journals and research papers with a desperate urgency. The man, who introduced himself as Thomas, had become a blurry figure on a phone screen, his voice growing increasingly fragmented as his perception of time accelerated. My thoughts jumbled, seconds stretched like hours. His voice crackled through the receiver. The crowd, like statues, frozen yet moving. The despair in his voice was palpable, fueling Sarah's frantic search. Keywords like time distortion, experimental drug, and neurological effects flew across the screen. Each dead end felt like a punch to the gut, time slipping away like sand through her fingers. The frustration mounted, punctuated by frantic phone calls to Thomas. His descriptions grew more disjointed, his voice strained. Minutes for him felt like hours for her, a terrifying disparity that mirrored the chaos brewing inside her. Giving up on her apartment's limited internet resources, Sarah ventured out into the night. Coffee shops, with flickering neon signs, became her havens, their Wi-Fi passwords a lifeline to the vast ocean of information. From crowded cafes to dusty medical libraries, her search continued, a relentless pursuit against the relentless march of Thomas's distorted time. Hours blurred into what felt like days for Sarah. Exhaustion gnawed at her, but the fear for Thomas fueled her determination. Then, amidst a pile of dusty journals in a dimly lit library corner, a glimmer of hope emerged. A research paper titled Temporal Dissonance, Case Study and Potential Counteragent sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. The paper detailed a case eerily similar to Thomas's caused by a malfunctioning experimental drug. But more importantly, it mentioned Dr. Patel, a renowned neurologist who had been researching potential counteragents. With trembling hands, Sarah dialed the number listed in the paper. A long, agonizing silence followed, each ring echoing the deafening silence of her empty apartment. Just as she was about to give up, a weary voice answered on the other end. "Dr. Patel speaking," the voice said, laced with a hint of skepticism. Sarah poured out her story in a breathless torrent, the desperation in her voice painting a vivid picture of Thomas's plight. At first, Dr. Patel was skeptical, the situation sounding like a bizarre prank. But Sarah's raw desperation, the conviction in her voice, finally convinced him. "Meet me at the Glenmont platform tomorrow morning," he instructed, his voice laced with a newfound urgency. "We might be able to help him." Sarah hung up, a flicker of hope battling the exhaustion in her eyes. The platform, once a symbol of monotonous routine, now held the power to either shatter or solidify her newfound purpose. One thing was certain tomorrow. At Glenmont, the fight against the distorted clock would begin. Chapter 4. A Glimmer of Hope. Relief washed over Sarah in a wave that threatened to drown her. Dr. Patel, a name that had become a beacon of hope amidst the frantic chaos of the last few hours, was willing to help. But the elation was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing fear. She glanced at the clock, a mere 3 hours till sunrise. 3 hours that for Thomas could stretch into an eternity. Sleep, a desperate luxury, was out of the question. She paced her cramped apartment, the exhaustion a dull ache in her limbs overshadowed by a fierce determination. Picking up her phone, Sarah dialed the number again. This time, Dr. Patel picked up on the first ring. Dr. Patel, his voice, though laced with fatigue, held a hint of professional curiosity. Sarah explained her concerns, her voice trembling as she described Thomas's worsening condition. The fragmented phone calls, the distorted perception of time, each detail, painted a harrowing picture of a man teetering on the edge. "Look, Mrs. Jones," Dr. Patel said, his voice betraying a touch of skepticism. "What you're describing, it's highly unusual." "I understand," Sarah pleaded, "but it's true. Please, just come and see for yourself." Dr. Patel hesitated for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Sarah held her breath, the seconds ticking by with agonizing slowness. "All right," he finally sighed, a hint of resignation in his voice. "Meet me at the Glenmont platform in 2 hours. I'll do what I can, but I can't make any promises." Sarah's heart pounded with a mixture of relief and dread. Hope flickered, a fragile flame threatened by the relentless march of time. 2 hours for her, a lifetime for Thomas. The night crawled by. Every tick of the clock, every creak of the building felt amplified, a stark reminder of the urgency. She tried to distract herself, packing a small first aid kit. Useless, she knew, but it offered a semblance of control, and gathering information about the drug trial from the research paper. The first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale orange as Sarah finally stepped onto the Glenmont platform. The familiar scene seemed surreal, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a malevolent intensity. She spotted Thomas, hunched in the same spot, his figure even more skeletal under the harsh light. His eyes, vacant and bloodshot, flickered towards her arrival, a flicker of recognition briefly lighting them up. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Sarah tried to engage him, to keep him tethered to reality. The frantic crowd seemed to move in slow motion, a disturbing echo of Thomas's warped perception. Every passing moment was a battle against despair, every labored breath of Thomas, a stark reminder of the ticking clock. Then, a hurried figure pushed past the throng, a briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. Relief flooded Sarah as she recognized Dr. Patel. His presence, even with the skepticism etched on his face, offered a ray of hope in the midst of the distorted time vortex. "Sarah Jones?" Dr. Patel asked, his voice a welcome anchor in the chaos. "Where's the—" He didn't need to finish. His eyes darted to Thomas, and the skepticism melted away, replaced by a grim determination. Time, for Sarah, seemed to stand still as Dr. Patel knelt beside Thomas, his expression unreadable. Chapter 5. Race Against Time. The platform dissolved into a disorienting blur for Thomas. The rhythmic tide of commuters, once a monotonous background hum, fractured into a chaotic ballet of slow motion, jerks, and starts. The fluorescent lights, normally a dull white, strobed with an agonizing intensity, each flicker an eternity in his distorted perception. Sarah's voice, a lifeline tethering him to reality, seemed to echo from a vast distance. He struggled to focus, his vision blurring at the edges. His body, seemingly disconnected from his racing mind, trembled uncontrollably. Every heartbeat felt like a thunderclap, every breath a battle against the encroaching darkness. "Sarah," time he rasped, the words tumbling out in a broken stream. "It's speeding up, can't hold on." Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. Thomas's condition was deteriorating rapidly, his pleas growing more frantic with each passing moment, or what felt like an eternity for him. She relayed the urgency to Dr. Patel, her voice laced with desperation. Dr. Patel, his face etched with grim concentration, examined a small vial he had extracted from his briefcase. "We need to act fast," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of the distorted platform. The usual hustle and bustle of the morning commute now appeared grotesque, the hurried movements of the crowd a jerky, stop-motion animation. Time for Sarah seemed to stretch and contract, mirroring the chaos unfolding around them. Around them, the platform pulsed with a strange energy. The rhythmic hum of the fluorescent lights morphed into a high-pitched whine, punctuated by the occasional flicker that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. The hurried conversations of the commuters became a distorted cacophony, their faces contorted masks of indifference in Thomas's warped perception. Suddenly, a wave of nausea washed over Thomas. He slumped against the wall, his ragged breaths coming in short, desperate gasps. Sarah lurched forward, fear twisting her gut. "Thomas, stay with me," she cried, her voice echoing through the distorted reality. Dr. Patel knelt beside him, his brow furrowed in concern. "Hold on, Mr. Evans," he said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "We are here to help." With practiced ease, Dr. Patel extracted a syringe from his briefcase. Sarah watched, her heart hammering against her ribs as he carefully injected the clear liquid into Thomas's arm. The moment the needle touched his skin, a jolt of energy seemed to crackle through the air. The platform lights flickered violently, then stabilized. The distorted movements of the crowd smoothed out, returning to their normal hurried pace. The cacophony of voices returned to a familiar murmur. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought it might be too late. Then, a shudder ran through Thomas's body. His eyes fluttered open, a sliver of recognition flickering within their depths. He looked at Sarah, then at Dr. Patel, a question hanging in the air. "Is it over?" he rasped, his voice weak but clear. Dr. Pell offered a tight smile. "For now," he said, "but we need to get you to a hospital for further evaluation." Relief washed over Sarah in a wave so powerful it threatened to buckle her knees. The distorted nightmare, the race against a broken clock, seemed to recede like a receding tide. But a sliver of uncertainty remained. Had they truly outrun the glitch? Or was this just a temporary reprieve? Only time, in its normal, unhurried pace, would tell. Chapter 6. The Counter-Agent. The frenetic energy that had pulsed through the platform moments ago seemed to dissipate with the injection. The fluorescent lights, once strobing with an unsettling intensity, now hummed with their usual monotonous constancy. The jerky, stop-motion movements of the commuters smoothed out, replaced by the familiar hurried flow of the morning rush. Dr. Patel, ever the picture of professional calm amidst the chaos, monitored Thomas closely. Sweat beaded on his forehead, a testament to the silent battle that had just transpired. Sarah stood by, her breath hitching with every shallow rise and fall of Thomas's chest. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity. Had the counter-agent worked? Was Thomas truly free from the prison of his own distorted time perception? A tremor racked Thomas's body, followed by a shuddering gasp. Sarah flinched, her heart jumping into her throat. Then, his eyes fluttered open. For a terrifying moment, they were vacant, devoid of recognition. Just as despair threatened to engulf Sarah, a flicker of something sparked within their depths. Slowly, the glazed emptiness gave way to a sliver of awareness, a flicker of recognition. He looked at Sarah, then at Dr. Patel, his lips moving silently as if trying to form words. "Easy there, Mr. Evans," Dr. Patel soothed, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of emotions churning within Sarah. "You're safe now. The counter-agent should be stabilizing your perception." Thomas's chest rose and fell in a more regular rhythm now, the color slowly returning to his pale cheeks. His gaze darted around the platform, taking in the familiar bustle with a newfound clarity. A tremor, more emotional than physical, ran through him. "It's gone," his voice rasped, a whisper barely audible above the din of the morning commute. Dr. Patel offered a tight smile, unable to completely erase the uncertainty that flickered in his eyes. "For now," he said cautiously, "the effects of the drug are unpredictable. We need to get you to a hospital for a complete evaluation." Relief, tinged with a sliver of worry, washed over Sarah. They had pulled him back from the brink, yanked him out of the distorted time vortex. But whether it was a permanent reprieve or a temporary blip remained to be seen. As the paramedics arrived, bustling with practiced efficiency, Sarah watched Thomas being loaded onto a stretcher. His eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a silent gratitude passing between them. "Thank you," he mouthed, his voice weak but clear. Sarah offered a shaky smile, the words catching in her throat. "Don't mention it," she managed, the enormity of what they had just experienced settling in. The platform, once a symbol of monotonous routine, now held a different significance. It was a place where time fractured, a battleground where a desperate plea for help had become a fight against the clock. And though the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Sarah wouldn't soon forget the day the glitch in time brought her face to face with a nightmare, and the courage it took to fight for a stranger lost in its distorted grip. Chapter 7. Reintegration. The sterile white walls of the hospital room offered a stark contrast to the distorted reality Sarah had witnessed on the platform. Thomas, no longer a figure shrouded in despair, lay propped against the pillows, his face etched with fatigue, but a spark of awareness flickering in his eyes. Days had passed since the counteragent injection, each tick of the clock a reassuring reminder of normalcy. Yet, the ordeal lingered like a phantom limb. For Thomas, the return to linear time felt jarring. The smooth flow of seconds, the predictable rhythm of life, seemed somehow slow. His mind, accustomed to the frantic pace of his distorted perception, struggled to adjust. Simple tasks, like catching a fly buzzing in the room, felt like an eternity. As he confided in Sarah, the fear and loneliness of being trapped in a personal time warp came pouring out. Sarah, in turn, spoke of the helplessness she felt, a bystander thrust into an extraordinary situation. They found solace in shared vulnerability. Sarah, tired of the monotonous routine of her life, discovered a spark of purpose in helping Thomas. He, in turn, felt a flicker of hope rekindled by her unwavering support. One dreary afternoon, as sunlight filtered weakly through the window, Sarah visited Thomas, a news report playing in the background. A reporter's voice boomed from the television, detailing a series of isolated incidents involving individuals experiencing time distortions. A chilling echo of Thomas' ordeal hung in the air. "They're calling it a glitch in the city's power grid," the reporter continued, "but some experts are skeptical." Sarah and Thomas exchanged a worried glance. The notion of isolated incidents seemed far-fetched. Their experience felt far too deliberate, too targeted. Dr. Patel, who had become a silent observer of their growing bond, entered the room with a grim expression. He held his phone, a cryptic message displayed on the screen. "This just came in," he said, his voice laced with a newfound urgency. "From a confidential source, it says the drug trial wasn't an accident." The revelation hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The platform, the glitch, Thomas's ordeal, it all started to feel like a single piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that, if solved, could reveal a conspiracy far more sinister than a malfunctioning drug trial. Sarah looked at Thomas, their shared experience forging a silent pact. The fight against the distorted clock might be over, but a new battle, one with far-reaching consequences, had just begun. Chapter 8. Beyond the Impossible. An air of apprehension hung heavy in Dr. Patel's office. The sterile white walls, usually a source of comfort, seemed to amplify the unease gnawing at Sarah and Thomas. News of the isolated incidents and Dr. Patel's cryptic message had shattered their newfound sense of normalcy. The message, Dr. Patel began, his voice grave, came from a whistleblower within Kronos Pharmaceuticals, the company that conducted the drug trial. He projected a company logo onto the wall, a stylized hourglass, its sand seemingly caught in an endless flow. "Kronos," Sarah echoed, a shiver running down her spine. The name held a weight of unease, a whisper of something sinister. "Yes," Dr. Patel confirmed. "Apparently, the trial you experienced, Mr. Evans, wasn't an isolated incident. It seems Kronos has been experimenting with time manipulation for some time." He explained how the whistleblower, a disgruntled scientist, had managed to leak a fragment of information, a cryptic formula hinting at the drug's components. It was enough to pique Dr. Patel's curiosity, especially after witnessing Thomas's experience firsthand. "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What possible reason could they have?" Dr. Patel shook his head. "That's what we need to find out." The message mentioned something about Project Kronos, a highly classified initiative within the company. A cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach. This was no longer a matter of a malfunctioning drug trial. They were entangled in something much bigger, something potentially dangerous. "So what do we do?" Thomas asked, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. Dr. Patel hesitated, his gaze flitting between them. "You both took a tremendous risk on the platform," he acknowledged. But this goes beyond the medical. It could be very dangerous. Silence descended upon the room, thick with the weight of the situation. Sarah glanced at Thomas, a silent question hanging in the air. They had already faced the impossible, stared down a distorted perception of time. Could they back down now? "We can't just ignore it," Sarah finally said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "People are getting hurt. We have to find out what's going on." Thomas nodded, his jaw set in a determined line. The ordeal on the platform had changed him. He wouldn't be a passive victim this time. Dr. Patel sighed, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "All right," he conceded, "but we need to be cautious. Kronos is a powerful corporation. They won't hesitate to silence anyone who gets in their way." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine, but she held her ground. Stepping out of Dr. Patel's office, she and Thomas exchanged a resolute glance. The platform ordeal might be over, but their fight for answers, their battle against the shadows of Kronos, had just begun. The impossible, it seemed, was only the beginning.